Hello and welcome to another episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Marie and Drake. Today, we are going to have a talk about a very interesting topic, which will be part of our Writer's Trials and Tribulations, our Writer's Journey series. But before we get into that, my name is Marie. I'm a YouTuber and fantasy author, and with me as always is Drake.
And I'm Drake, award-winning novelist, lead fiction writer for Sony's EverQuest Next, or at least I was. Teach writing all over the world, yada, yada, yada.
If you like this podcast, if you get value out of it, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it with your friends, do all of those YouTube-y things and podcasty things. Okay.
But before we get into that topic, let's do a trope talk.
Yeah, we haven't done one of those in a while.
We have not done one of those in a while. And I kind of want to talk, it ties into today's subject a little bit. I want to talk about, we mention it often, we're going to mention it today, Deus Ex Machina, which is God in the machine. I think you have a perfect definition of it.
I do have a definition here from the great site TV Tropes. Deus Ex Machina is when some new event, character, ability, or object solves a seemingly unsolvable problem in a sudden and unexpected way. It is often used as a solution to what is called writing yourself into the corner.
This does fall into what I call that 400 foot of rope phenomenon, where, and I came up with that, and I think people have heard this story, but basically I was reading an unpublished work where the hero was trapped on 400-foot cliff, and he happened to bring 400 foot of rope with him. Not that it had ever been mentioned before, and that's a crap ton of rope. And wow, really not 350 foot of rope or 450 foot of rope, but exactly the amount of rope you need for the cliff that you're on. That's amazing. So those happen all the time. And technically, by your definition, that would fall into that, because now we have an object that shows up out of nowhere to fix this unsolvable solution. Because in the book, I think it literally read something to the effect of, because it was very telly, the hero found himself on a 400-foot cliff with absolutely no way off. Luckily, he remembered to bring 400 foot of rope. And so, yeah.
The only way that works is if it's a comedy. Like if it's a tongue-in-cheek kind of comedy.
Kind of. I still think that you're going to get away with that once.
Yes.
That's still a rough thing to force on your readers.
Yeah.
And so technically that would also be that. But really what we're talking about here, or at least what I think we're going to talk about here, is the climax. So, you're going all the way to the end. If this ritual goes off, this demon is going to get raised from the pits of hell, and all life on earth ends. There is no way to stop it. There is no way to save it. If this happens, it happens. And then it happens, the demon rises up, and then literally God shows up and goes, I don't want you here anymore. And then the story ends. And you're like, but God wasn't in this story at all. So that's really kind of what we're talking about here. And yeah, that's where it's like you've really written yourself into a corner.
Yes. And it was really, it's really annoying to the reader, in my opinion. I do not like Deus Ex Machina. I think you can get away with it maybe once in a story if you disguise it really well. But honestly, just don't write yourself into that kind of corner. And if you're in that corner and the only way out is a Deus Ex Machina, then go plant your Deus Ex Machina. Give it some love throughout the story, and then have it, be a fully matured godling when you reach.
But then it's not a Deus Ex Machina.
No, then it's not a Deus Ex Machina. So if you find yourself in a Deus Ex Machina, fix it. Don't let it stand.
I've told this story. I don't know if I've told it on this podcast. But I may have. I've had cancer since we started this whole thing, so I don't remember much about a lot of it. But there was a thing where, and none of this is accurate, but this is just an easy way to explain the story. There was an angel that was going to go fight a demon on his home turf, and the angel was more agile, but the demon is faster. And I had already set up that if the demon gets his hand on the angel's dead. And I even did it to the point where, before he leaves, the angel reaches for his sword and thinks to himself, yeah, if that demon gets close enough for me to use this sword, I'm dead. And so he just leaves it. He's like, I don't even want to take it because I don't even want to take the chance of thinking I might be able to use this. And then later in the story, I wrote the line, the demon barreled into the angel because they were chasing each other through the air. The demon barrels into the angel, slams against the wall, and they slide down to the alley floor. And I literally picked my fingers up and I went, well, crap. Because I don't cheat. So if this is the way it happened, this is the way it happened. And so now, like, what's going to happen? And so I did end up adding a bracelet, a magical bracelet charged with energy that he used to basically electrocute the demon. It actually worked out really well because the demon, this was a backstory piece. And so in the future, the demon thing, and it's not a demon, but it's missing one of its eyes and it has this nasty scar across it. So that's in the novel already. And I never figured out how he got it. I just thought it was a cool way to describe this thing. He's just missing an eye. And so when I added this, I did have to go back and change because I did describe the demon when he first popped up with his messed up eye, like I always do. But this time, since I added these magic bracelets, I'm like, oh, I'm going to pop his eye right here. This is how he loses his eye. So not only did I fill that hole, I did have to go back and, when he shows up describing with two eyes, which I thought was cool. But then I also had to go back and add those bracelets in. And so, like, in the opening scene, he's arguing with his brother about this whole mission. And I already had the line where he pounded his fist on the table. And so I just added his bracelet jingled, electricity sparking between its charms. And then there was another spot where I added in and another spot where I added in. So yeah, by the time it happens, there's some type of magical bracelet on him. It's got some type of energy in it. And so when he uses it and it pops and it rips across the demon's face and pops his eyeball and throws it, to the other side of the alleyway, you do not feel like it's a Deus Ex Machina because it's not. It doesn't come out of nowhere. Now, I never hint at what the bracelets can do. I hint that they have some type of energy in them, that they like to, kind of every time he does anything violent with them, they'll kind of be like, ooh, is it my turn to be like, is it me now? Am I getting used? But I never say, he took the bracelets, which would discharge a massive bolt of electricity that could save him in a pinch. I don't say anything like that, but it feels organic at that point.
Your stories made me think of there's an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where there's a demon that they're like, oh my god, the world's going to end when this demon gets summoned, and it's like this terrible demon, and like they spend the whole episode running around trying to stop the demon rising, and then they fail and it pops out and it's like yay big and Buffy steps on it, and then they go back to the book where it's like this terrible demon blah blah, and it says drawn to scale right at the bottom of the illustration.
But that's a comedy and you can get away with stuff like that.
That was very funny.
That's very
it was
funny.
Beautiful. So
right.
You can get away with it then,
right.
that kind of thing then.
Right.
But in a serious story, in a serious episode, in a serious book, you should definitely not lean into the Deus Ex Machina trope, in my opinion.
That's what I said. I always say genius isn't written, it's edited. So everyone who read that was like, oh my goodness, it was so awesome. And, all this stuff. And you're such a brilliant writer and storyteller. I'm like, well, I mean, eventually I'm a brilliant storyteller. Sure.
After I went back and edited it and sorted out the issues.
So my marketing team, one of the things they've been pushing is because some writers do this and they get a lot of success out of it. He wants me to do some live writing where I actually, write while people are watching me write. And I'm like, yeah, that will never happen. That will literally never happen. I'm already, just even with my beta readers, I have edited so many times. That's why we say good luck to find a typo, and they will. I mean, you're talking tens of thousands of words, so they're going to find a typo in there, but not very many, because and I think that's because of the fact that my background and no education and dyslexic and everything like that I just have this. It's one of the reasons why I still to this day carry index cards with me as part of my booth kit, and if somebody just wants me to sign a name or whatever, Even if it's like, could you make that out to Bill? I'll go, yeah, how do you spell that? And they're like, Bill. I'm like, people spell things weird. And that always gets me off the hook, where they're like, okay, I've never seen Bill spelled wrong, but I guess you're right. People do spell, it's Bill. And I'll be like, okay. But anything longer than that, if they're like, hey, could you dedicate it to my niece and say, I will pull out one of those index cards and I'll go, here, just write what you want me to write and I'll do it. And I do it because I'm terrified of misspelling something. And I am good enough that, if you're out there going, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to spell it wrong, I'm good enough to recognize when a word is spelled wrong. My brain just doesn't know how to fix it. And so I'm hoping that I would catch that and go, I think this word is spelled wrong. Are you sure this is, right or whatever? And then I'll more than likely turn to Google, because that's what I do. I've stopped doing that because I have Alexa sitting on my desk. Hey, she didn't answer. Yay. So she's sitting right here in front of me. And anytime now when I need a word spelled, I just say, hey, woman, tell me how to spell this word. And usually, I mean, some of the weird ones, it's like, tell me how to spell, I don't know, celestial. And she'll be like, celery. See, I'm like, no, I did not ask for that. Like, so she doesn't always get it right, but, it still helps.
And speaking of spelling, I think that is a good segue into getting your headbook onto paper. Today, we're going to be talking about your headbook versus your paper book and how to recognize when your headbook has not hit the paper, and sort of signs to watch out for, and the kind of feedback that you'll get and how to fix it.
It is a phenomenon that everyone goes through, even me. Everyone has to deal with. But it's also, I want to take a step back, because we're going to talk a lot about writers groups here too. It's also impacts writers groups tremendously. Some writers groups that I've seen will do what they call a gag order on the person reading, the person to be critiqued. And they'll say, you can't say anything. You can't open your mouth. And I got a couple problems with that. First of all, I'm a grown man. You're not going to tell me I can't talk. And second of all, I'm Drake, and so I talk all the time, and so you really can't stop me from talking. I play a game where I'm supposed to play a character where I can't talk, and I still talk during that. So, just the way it is. But I do understand why the gag order has come into play. And so in my writers groups, I do have 2 rules that prohibit the critique from speaking. And inevitably people do, and I go, that's, you're doing this thing. But these are specific things that you're doing wrong. The first, which isn't our topic, is arguing about how your writing made someone feel. So, and it's a little more hidden than this in the conversation. You'll have to start getting used to being aware of it, but to be blunt about it, just to be open so that everybody understands, it's more of a, so I just read this thing of yours, or you just read this thing of yours, and it made me feel like this. And the writer will go, no, it didn't. And again, it's not that blunt and in your face. It's a little more obscure, but it is still, that is what's going on. The writing made the listener, reader, whatever, feel something or understand something, or, extrapolate something or predict something. And the writer saying it didn't. And that's stupid. You can't argue with somebody about the way it felt. So on that note, I tell people, don't argue about that. Just make a note. The writing didn't make the reader feel the way you wanted it to feel. So go fix it. Go change it. You thought it did this. Everyone at the table is telling you it didn't. So you're wrong. It's just the way it is. And then, don't argue about that. But the second thing is we're talking about here, which is the headbook. So what I mean by that is, when you're writing, you're actually writing 2 novels at the same time, and you don't realize it. You're writing one on paper, but you're also writing one in the head at the same time. And you cannot tell the difference between the 2. To you, they're seamlessly one book. The only way to find out what is in one book versus the other is to have somebody else read it. When somebody else reads it, they're only getting the paper book. They're not getting the headbook. And so when they say, I don't understand this, or I can't see where I'm at, or where was this thing at? It seems like it came out of nowhere, whatever. There's a million different things, and we'll talk about a lot of them today. The inclination at a writer's group is to explain.
Yeah.
Well, so the giant statue was sitting off to the left, and that's the one that came to life. Like, well, don't explain that to me, because if you have to explain that to me, it's not in the writing. So just keep your mouth shut and make the note to yourself, oh crap, didn't explain where statue was standing. Because unless you're going to travel around the world and physically talk to everyone who buys your book and explain to them where the statue was standing, then you have failed. You're going to want to put that in the book, in the writing, in the paper writing, the paper book. So that's really what we're talking about. It's the fact that you can see where the statue's standing. And so it's in your head book. And so you write the scene knowing exactly where that statue is standing and know exactly where it's, when it comes to life and it attacks the characters, whatever, you know exactly because it's in your head book. But it's not on the paper book, so the reader doesn't know. It just comes out of nowhere for them. And so that's what we're talking about. It's things that in your mind, when you reread your stuff, it's all there because you can't tell the difference between whether you're reading out of your head book or whether you're reading out of the paper book. So I don't think it's something that you can find on your own. There are tricks that I use.
Yeah.
But
I was about to say, I think you can find some of it on your own with enough kind of paying attention to detail. But it is hard to find on your own. It is easier if somebody else points it out to you, which is why you should make sure that your stuff gets either critiqued or you're in a writer's group or somebody needs to read it with a view to, yeah, so I didn't even know there was a door there. Never mind that it, could be opened with magic and screamed when you hit it wrong. So it's a very important part of writing a smooth book. And I think it's also one of the key components to making sure that the movie that your reader is watching in their head flows smoothly. Because if a actual video, if you were watching a TV series and it went from like a transition of like, I'm in this scene where I'm outside, and the next scene, I'm in this scene where I'm inside, and there was no indication that there'd been a scene transition. You as the reader, you're going like, what just happened here? Did they teleport? Like,
yeah.
So,
and in the writer's mind, they saw the transition, but it was never written.
Yes.
And so this is something that you're always going to struggle with. And it really comes down to understanding, setting the scene. You got to set the scene. You've got to, so here's the trick that I do. And this is a weird thing. And it took me years to kind of get to this, but every time I reread something of mine, I clear my mind and it's a blank canvas. And as I read stuff, I allow the canvas to take that on it. So if I describe a statue, I put it on the canvas. If I don't describe the statue, I don't put it on the canvas. I leave it intentionally blank. I don't allow myself to assume that anything is there. And that's difficult, especially considering you wrote it, you've reread it maybe once or twice or 10 times, and now you're rereading it again. And so it's hard to go at it with an eye of, I don't know anything. I definitely have a gift of wiping my brain clean of all substances. So I don't know what that says about me, but I'm really easy to go brain dead and then step into it. But it is something that I think helps me out with finding out which, and also just being cognizant of it. I mean, I think a lot of writers just don't even realize. They don't even realize that they're writing two books at the same time. It's a weird concept. And again, I've never heard it before I started talking about it. So it is an abstract thing, which is kind of how I look at the world. And so I'm always looking for answers of why people do stuff. And, going to so many writers groups coming up through the ranks, and listening to people explain. Like, no, it's obvious. The statue was standing off to the left. And you're like, no, it's literally not there. And then, of course, I'm going to wonder why all these people keep doing the same exact thing. And then, that's where I came up with this theory of the whole headbook thing. But it's proven true for 30 years now. And so you do. And that's why it's so important when you're in a writer's group and somebody says, I don't understand something. I don't see this. If they ask a question, they're like, I'm confused. Where did this thing come from? Or why are they doing this thing? If you feel yourself getting ready to open your mouth and go, oh, well, that's easy, blah, 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 stop yourself and go, oh, crap. Okay. And then just write the note of, I didn't explain X. And then when you go through it, make sure that you're looking for opportunities to put whatever X is into the writing. You know what it is. You just got to get into the writing. And yes, I'm hammering on like setting the scene and stuff like that, but big concepts as well, where it's like, I've had this before where they're like, well, it's obvious that John loves Sally. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not.
Me.
Yeah, it's not. And so even big concept items like that, you have to think about and go, oh man, I thought they really loved each other.
So I think we need to identify a few, and definitely, okay, so for me, one of the reasons why we're talking about today is scene transitions, because I was saying to Drake that I'd read somebody's chapter in the site that I'm part of, and they'd been at a funeral pyre, and there was like burning, and it was all very sensory descriptions and so on, and then the next sentence is spoken in a room. And I'm like, how did this happen? Like, how did they move from here to here? And I didn't know.
And that's when I said, well, the writer does see all of that. They saw the transition in their head. And so as far as they're concerned, they've done their job.
Yes. And that's so the very first thing to look for is scene transitions. And as you described your way with a canvas, the way that I do it is kind of similar, but I will tend to read my scenes very, very carefully for like, have I accounted for every step of this scene? Like, I know he started here, I know he ends there. Is there a clear path between them? So I do it kind of like that. But I mean, however you do it.
When it comes to transitions, for me, it's I'm actually watching a movie. Yeah. And so when that jump happens, it's weird to me, just like it would be if I was watching a film. And so it glitches. And I go, well, that wasn't comfortable. I need something else to make that transition smoother. And so for me, when I get into that, it's but I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I've talked about this before about me being dyslexic. One of the weird things about being dyslexic is we only see images. We don't see anything. And not only do we only see images, we see everything in 3D. That's why we spin letters, because to us, and it's not like when I say I've said that before, it's like I see letters in 3D and they're like, oh, you see an S that's sitting there rotating. No, I see an S from all sides, from 360 degrees, all at the same time, simultaneously. There is no front, there is no back, there is no top or bottom. There's just a 3D item. And so that's why so many dyslexics will write stuff backwards, because to us, there is no front or back. It's the same. And so the advantage to that is, the disadvantage is getting through the ranks of really becoming really great at prose. Like when I tell people that are fans of mine that I'm dyslexic, they're like, there's no way. Like, I've read dyslexic people. There's no way. There's no way. But I've spent decades honing and focusing on just getting over that disability that I have. But the advantage to it is everything is visual to me. It's why my scenes, that's the thing that people tout on me about, is that they can see everything in my writing. They feel like they're a part of it. They feel like they're in the moment and surrounded by it. And it's because I'm just writing what I see. I don't have to think about it. And so transitions to me have always been very, very crucial. Even before I understood kind of what I was doing, it glitched when I reread it. It would glitch in my mind, and that glitch threw me out so bad that I had to go back and figure something out to smooth it out. So that's just the way I am. And
Yeah.
so
So
maybe that might help other people. Just think about it. Watch the movie.
and definitely try and catch like transitions, and also things that happen in battle. Quite often, you know, people be like, he drew his sword. Well, he was wearing a sword, you know.
Right.
He's never worn a sword before. Like, why has he got one now? Or, you know, just think about, like, make sure that you're not coming out of nowhere with things.
Uh-huh.
Try and make sure, like, if a dude, you know, climbs a wall and finds a tree on the other side, that's fine, you know, but maybe have like the leafy top of the tree sticking out over the wall or something, like, so that the reader kind of feels like they're in a fully fleshed out place.
Right.
Then I think the other big place where the head book sometimes doesn't translate, and this is more like you were talking about, like emotional, but I think the other place is really with villains and how scary villains are. And here's the reason why I say that. I recently read a complete book, and I really enjoyed it. The writer's really good, but the villains evoked no fear in me for the characters. And that was one of the primary things that I gave feedback on to the writer, because to me, those villains were never scary because the characters never lost. Sometimes they had to flee from the villains, but they still fled with their victory intact. They didn't lose anything in the fleeing. They, you know, managed to get out of the ambush that had been set for them and escape without harm. But the characters spent an awful lot of time telling me how frightening the villains were.
Right. Well, and the opposite of that is the book that I just finished reading, which is where they were like, you know, here's this thing. It's going to. So there was this thing that that it's a thing that when it's put inside of a person, the God can take control of the person. There's no way to resist it. Once the ritual has happened and this thing is inside of you, you are a puppet. You literally can't do anything. It's death. It's worse than death because you're trapped inside your body until the God is done with you, and then your body is destroyed. So you get to live out the rest of your days, you know, as a prisoner, and then you die. And so it was harped on often. This is it. This is it. This is it. And then the main character gets captured, and the evil guys put one inside of him. And he shrugs it off. Like he's never displayed any ability to, you know, mentally withstand the onslaught of a god. And yet he's just like, eh. And so it was not good. It was not an earned victory.
Yeah.
So telling your audience that something is the end, the worst of ever, and if it ever happens, it's going to be death to everybody, and then letting it happen, and it doesn't kill anybody. It isn't the end. It doesn't do anything. It's not even like it would be better. I still wouldn't recommend it, but it'd be better if you went down that path, you put the characters into it, and then they literally earned the victory to get out of it, either through cleverness or, you know, something, whatever, who knows. But even that, it's a bad plot device to say, if this happens, the story's over, and then let it happen. Trying to think if I've ever done that. I don't think I ever have. It's a weak plot device.
I think that you can do it, but then it needs to be kind of like overcoming the thing that's going to end the story, you know, is then kind of should be the central theme of the story, should be the central like thing that you're doing with the story. You know what I mean? Like then at the end of it, when you overcome that thing, when it's like, okay, you know, the end of the world device activates, but we have prepared for it with sufficient, and we managed to like deflect the nuclear radiation to the sun or whatever.
See, that isn't, so that's different. So there's two things that I do want to expand upon. Let me do one thing first, and then I'll get onto that. One thing, understand what I'm saying by it's the end. So I'm not talking about writing a teenage angst story where the girl is like, if he looks at me, my life is over. Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm like, that's a mental thing. What you're saying is like, okay, if this bomb goes off, the radiation is going to hit the earth and we're all going to die. And then the characters sit down and go, okay, how can we avoid that? And they struggle and they figure it out. And they're like, oh, we could build this shield that, this giant vacuum cleaner that would suck all the radiation up and send it to the sun. Well, how do we do that? Well, that's going to be very difficult. And then, you have this whole story of them going on this quest to get what they need and build the thing and get it just in time to save the planet. You have a plan. What I'm talking about is the bomb's going to go off. It's going to destroy the planet. There's nothing we can do about it. Well, what can we do about it? Nothing, literally nothing. Well, maybe we can catch the bad guy and stop him from detonating. That would be it, because if he pushes the button, it's over. It's done. It's done. And so you do the whole quest trying to catch the bad guy, and right before you catch him, he pushes the button. And you're like, and then all of a sudden, the character just pulls out this vacuum cleaner. It's like, I've been working on this vacuum cleaner, and it'll send it to the sun. And like, you didn't earn that at all.
No.
Like, that was terrible. And that's basically what I feel like happened in this book that I was reading. And and that was just one example. He actually, so this is the third book of the series, and I'm not going to continue for not just this reason, but several other reasons that this series has gone off the rails. But starting in the second book, he started doing that. And then in the third book, there's at least 3 or 4 times where, maybe even more than that every single victory was just, this is going to be impossible. You're going to die. And then he absolutely did not earn.
And then he magically has 400 feet of rope in his backpack, and that's just right there.
Kind of. Yeah. Although he did it once, and I actually really liked it. I don't want to go into it because I'm bad mouthing the series, and I don't want to like throw him under the bus. This guy's not big enough to take. Like, I'll pick on some of the bigger people because they've made millions of dollars and whatever. This guy's not one of those guys.
They're not going to get hurt by criticisms. It's not going to hurt their bottom line.
Right. But this one, he's pretty small. And so, yeah, I can't explain what it was, but he actually did a 400-foot of rope thing that was funny, but it was in the first book which was much more of a comedy. The second book stopped being a comedy. The third book is kind of turned into I have a political view and I'm going to shove it down your throat through this fantasy story. And that's probably the main reason why I'm not going to read it, because I went ahead. There's something else annoying that he does, and I wanted to see if anybody else was annoyed by it. So I went and started reading reviews of the fourth book. And the number one review was, so I saw the political stuff coming, but in this book, it is so thick, it makes me puke in my mouth. And I'm like, yeah, I'm out. You're not going to preach your political views to me. Screw you. That ain't happening.
No.
Not in a fantasy book.
No. Things I think are very important in terms of identifying the headbook stuff is your villains can't just be powerful because in your head they're powerful. They need to, on the paper, be powerful. And they can't be powerful because it comes out of characters' mouths that they're powerful. That doesn't make them powerful. What makes them powerful is they must have some victories. The villains have to win, and the characters have to take losses. Otherwise, they're not powerful villains.
Yep.
And in your case, if you're going to use something to have the characters overcome, like a doomsday device or an end of story device or something, you have to plant it, tend it, and only then can you reap it. You can't just insert a plot device You can't just have him have 400 foot of rope in a backpack that he's never worn before. Like, it's not going to work. And your readers are going to feel very cheated by that as a solution. It's a very Deus ex machina solution.
Yep.
Somebody who can take the criticism, especially since, he's dead now and it really doesn't matter anymore, is Terry Goodkind.
Mm-hmm.
So Terry Goodkind's entire magic system can be described as Richard Summons Deus Ex Machina, the whole magic system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of my biggest complaints with those books, other than the blatant Ayn Rand, and how do you pronounce her name? Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand. Goodkind.
I think it's Ayn Rand.
Ayn Rand. Goodkind was an Ayn Rand fan of note, like of note. Anyway, he also in the final books had a very heavy political bent to him, to the other side from these days, but it was also like a hammer to the face.
Yeah, he lived right down the road from me. I mean, like an hour down the road, but still.
Yeah,
he lived here basically in Vegas, south of Vegas.
Yeah.
In Boulder City.
Anyway, so when your magic system or your head book works like that, where you've got like this continuous reversion to Deus Ex Machina, you probably want to rethink what you're doing, and go back, lay some groundwork, make sure that the reader's following along what you're seeing in your head with what's on paper.
Yeah.
And if somebody says to you, this feels like Deus Ex Machina, don't get defensive about it, because your first reaction will be, but didn't you know that the character had that? You must not have been paying attention. Don't do that. Go and look back and see if you actually put in enough clues to reach this point.
That's a good point. So when I say make a note of it and go fix it, I've had plenty of readers that totally miss one line and it changes the entire scene. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe that you felt that way. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Blah, blah, blah. And I'll go, well, there's this line. And they're like, oh. But even still on those, I go, okay, obviously one line isn't good enough.
No.
For this whatever. And so I'll look for a different way to work it in a second time, maybe, or whatever.
The thing with one line is, if one reader missed it, many readers could miss it.
Right. And that's another Drakeism, is that if you follow Drake's rule of 10, and like my fan base is 350, 400,000 strong, then each one of those is 40,000 people. So if one of them is like, I missed this, do I really want to have 40,000 people miss that? And I'm like, no, I do not.
Yeah.
And so I've got to readjust and fix that problem.
Yeah. And especially when it's something that is so pivotal, it changes how you feel about the scene. You want that to be something that the reader has to be really kind of thick to miss. Like they have to have completely, been half asleep when they read it.
Right. And that'll happen too. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Sure.
Because again, it's about making decisions. So if I go back and I go, man, I don't see how anybody, if they're just halfway paying attention, I don't see it, even though it's only one line or one section or one paragraph or whatever. I don't want to be any more heavy-handed than this. So it is still up to you. It's still, your name is on the cover of that book. Your name is what's going to get the accolades and the criticisms. And so you have to decide, do I really, I need to change this? Do I not want to change this? How am I going to change this? So on and so forth.
And I think that's also like a very important thing, because you don't want to go, like, in my opinion, you don't want to go so heavy-handed that, it becomes an info dump. Because I have seen that too. I mean, none of us really liked all of Tolkien's I suppose there might be people who really like Tolkien's travel scenes, but let's be honest, like, it's a struggle to get through those scenes. So sometimes,
Almost like a
less.
walk across the country.
Less can be more. So, don't fall into exposition territory. Try and keep it like light enough, but make sure that people can actually follow the scene. Now, I do want to also say that sometimes you don't want to have everything. Like, I was actually just writing a fight scene for my second edition of Hidden Blade, and in the fight scene I have an archer, a crossbowman, a slinger, and I've got 3 swordsmen down at the bottom floor. So I've got these guys on like a second floor gallery and the swordsman down at the bottom. And they kill, and you see on screen, you see the death of a crossbowman, you see the death of the archer, you see the death of the swordsman. Then some other stuff happens that ends the fight. You never see the death of the slinger. But that's because the main character is in no state to go, the POV character is in no state to look around and remember that there was even a slinger, because like other stuff has happened. So he ignores the slinger. Now, in my headbook, the slinger kind of snuck away, quietly, because he's just a mook. He was like, oh, look, everybody's lost. I'm going to keep my mouth shut and get the hell out of Dodge. The reader doesn't need to see that. They don't need to be aware of it.
I may play devil's advocate here
Okay.
with this one. Well, I haven't read that scene yet. That's why I'm like, do I really want to open my mouth and talk about something I know literally nothing about, other than the brief 10,000 foot elevated description that you just did? But I will pose some questions. So one, if I'm going to have something like that, why is the slinger even there? Why not just cut the slinger if it literally means nothing? So that's one. And these are all hypothetical questions. We're not, unless you just want to discuss them. Is there opportunities for the character to go, there was one more, I don't know what happened to him. And then somebody say, oh yeah, I saw him slink away. I mean, like, I don't like loose ends in my writing, so I'll look for some way to, like I said, even if he did slink away, but also if he slinks away, it's because I'm going to use him again. He's not going to disappear forever. He's going to come back, cause something else, whatever. And it could be as simple as he's walking through the bazaar a year later and recognizes the dude and is like, hey, you were the dude that tried to kill me with that sling. Like, whatever. I mean, that's a terrible example. I'm just saying, I don't like pieces that don't fit into the puzzle as a storyteller. So I try to make sure that every piece somehow has something to do with it. One of the things I used to tell my fans all the time, if I ever describe a painting, pay attention to it. Because I don't describe paintings for no reason. Like, if I'm going to describe what the painting actually looks like, that's because it's important. So otherwise, I'll just say paintings line the wall.
So I think that is probably one of the things that we are different as writers. Because I will describe paintings and art purely for world building. And I don't know.
That has a purpose.
Yeah, sort of. I don't know how many of my readers will pick up on the fact that every painting in Rokai is a winter scene. I don't know if any of them will pick up that every tapestry that lines the wall is Rokai in winter. It's never summer in those paintings. I don't know if any of them will ever pick that up. There is a reason for it, but
but there's a reason for it, and there's a consistency to it. So you're still doing it on purpose.
I don't know if anybody will know or care that in the games room of the Imperial Palace, the Capiola shows the rebirth of people into the Great Wheel, and it's part of kind of the artistry of Vero, and it's the kind of solidification of their religion. I don't know how many people will pick that up and care.
But again, all those matter.
They do and they don't. Like, nothing nothing would really fundamentally change if I didn't describe all of those things. The plot would still be the plot.
Right, but what would fundamentally change is the world would feel a little less real,
Yes.
a little less dynamic.
So now the thing about the slinger slinking off into the darkness is, to me, that almost does make the world more real, because people do slink away into the darkness when they lose a fight.
Right.
It does happen, you know, especially when you're just a thief that got recruited, that got forced by your boss to be here, and now everybody's lost. And you're just like, I'm gonna just sneak away.
Right. Well, and yeah, it's the same. Like I said, if it was something like that and I wanted him in the scene, I would still have some type of closure on it. Just like, Drake thought there was 3 people on the balcony, but he only saw 2 dead bodies. He looked around for a minute, but realized the guy must have split when he saw his friends all die. And then I can be done with it. Like I said, I need more than just to never mention them again.
Yeah, so the reason why I didn't do it that way, because I did think about doing that, is I'm like, man, would he really think of that? Like, given what has just happened, because the thing that ends the fight is spectacular, right? And it's terrible. And really. And I'm like, at that point, I think unless the slinger jumps out and stabs him in the back, it's just not going to think about the dude again.
Well, and again, then I would challenge you to, does the slinger even need to be there?
Yes, because the slinger does something earlier in the fight that, like,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. And like I said, this is all subjective. It's what you decide to do. Just my OCD with story means that nothing's wasted. Again, what I try to do, and I've said this before, for me, my story, I want it to be a Jenga tower on its last move. You pull any block, and the tower falls. Remove any chapter of my story, the whole thing doesn't work. Remove any, I can't say that you can't remove a paragraph, because I do explain, I do describe a lot and set a lot of scene and everything like that. But I definitely feel like you can't remove a scene. If you remove a scene,
you cannot remove the scene. It's a pivotal scene.
No, I was just saying.
Yeah.
I was saying I'd love to be able to say that you can't even remove a paragraph, but really I do. I'm really OCD on, making sure that everything has a purpose and is used, and there is no waste. Even so in the rewrite of Genesis, I added this scene where one of the characters is walking through a crowded area and somebody tries to pickpocket him, and he notices it. He uses his magic. He grabs the guy's hand and he's like, no, you can do something. There are better fish out there. Just go get them, because I'm way too powerful for you to even think about messing with. And then that's it. And then later he gets ambushed by a bunch of people trying to kill him. And then even later than that, he's talking to his henchmen and they're like, how did they track you? And he's like, yeah, that was my fault. I thought this guy was a common thief pickpocketing me, but he actually put a tracking stone on me, and I just didn't notice it. So the thief's other hand, and again, you have to retroactively think about this, but one hand went for the purse. The other hand was actually tagging him with a magical tracking device. And so Clytus, and the thief obviously was good enough to fail the purse snatch and do it in a way that made it look like he was trying not to fail. So he's a very good thief. Now, you never see that thief again. But in my opinion, that still closes that loop, because we go, oh, that's why there was a random thief thing in that one chapter, several chapters ago. I now get where that's at. So and it's a while, it's not only is it like 3 or 4 chapters for this character, but there's 5 characters. So you're going through, other characters before you even get to that scene, to learn that the thief actually did have a purpose. And so to me, that's important. And that's just my OCD when it comes to story structure. Everything has to fit in somewhere.
100%. And I guess like that is just, to me, I almost want the slinger to be like a little bit of like the reader to go like, well, I guess he just got away, or he didn't,
Right.
or
Right. Well, that's the other thing is all of these things that happen like this, they then go down into a little list of potential callbacks.
Exactly.
And so you may never see this thief again, ever.
Yeah.
He was obviously hired by the priests. He's a local guy. They're not. They hired a local thief to do this thing so that they could then track this guy and ambush him. However, don't be shocked if, in another book, somewhere down the road, you find
the thing. I now know
exact description.
Exactly. So I now know I have a slinger. He was in a fight. He can recognize the main character. He was there. He saw the events play out in the warehouse, which in and of itself is an interesting thing. And I'm not saying I am going to use him again, but I might.
Right. Right. Well, like I said, I'm happy with the closure because his deed was used. Why he existed in the story was used. And then if we ever see that thief again, because obviously he's good at what he's doing. But I know he's not in the first 3 books. So there's only 2 books left. But anyway, off the subject.
Back to the headbook. The point is that sometimes your headbook might not make it onto the page because it's just extraneous detail. Like maybe you do just want to have the slinger slink away and you don't want the reader to think about him right now because he's going to come back later, or the thief, or whatever the case may be. So in that cases, that is fine. It is easier to find where you've overwritten than where you've underwritten. And I think that is a good note on which to end this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this, and we will see you soon for another one.
Bye.